Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr.DarXnights. I know many of you use these videos to relax or fall asleep, so before you drift off, leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's get comfortable and begin. Story 1. The Forgotten Cell. They say the walls remember, even after decades of silence, rot, and shadows crawling back into themselves. Some things don't fade. The smell of blood in cell block E was one of those things. It wasn't strong, just faint enough to confuse your mind into believing it was your imagination. But it wasn't, and those who walked in there, even for a second, left changed. Hollow Hills Correctional Facility had been closed since 1973. A riot that no one talked about, a lockdown that never fully ended, and a wing sealed with steel doors welded shut, officially labeled structurally unsafe. That's what the state told the public, that it was just bricks, pipes, and decay. Nothing alive, nothing dangerous, just a broken wing of a broken prison, better left forgotten. But then came the contract. In January 2023, a private development company, Pomeridge Corp., bought the Hollow Hills property in a quiet deal with the state. Their goal, to convert the facility into a historic horror experience resort, a twisted blend of reality tourism and immersive haunt attraction. For that, they needed the entire site reopened, even the forbidden East Wing. And so they sent in the workers. Welds were cut, chains snapped, doors groaned like they were in pain. The East Wing breathed again after 50 years, and that was the first mistake. I was part of the initial team assigned to survey the interior, just basic recon work. No demolition yet. Just document the layout, take notes, and log what we found. My name was David Lorne, site foreman. I'd done this kind of thing before, decrepit hospitals, moldy insane asylums, even a long-forgotten funeral home. But Hollow Hills was different. Something about it felt like it had teeth. We entered through the main corridor, flashlights slicing through thick dust that hadn't been disturbed in half a century. The air was thick, not with mold or decay, but with something heavier. It clung to your skin, made your ears ring. The further we walked, the more wrong everything felt. My boots echoed in the corridor, but sometimes, just sometimes, there was an echo that didn't belong to me. There were 5 of us on the first walk through me: Ricky, the electrician, Gerald, our tech lead, and 2 new kids, Jonas and Malik. They were hired last minute to help with the grunt work. Young, cocky, still making jokes to keep the nerves at bay. That didn't last long. When we reached cell 41E, it felt like hitting a wall of static. That was the cell, the one. Its door was rusted halfway open, not like the others. On the wall just beside it, long drag marks streaked the concrete. Brown, crusted, unmistakable. Blood, no doubt about it. But that wasn't the worst part. Inside the cell, smeared across the back wall, were fingerprints. 5 of them, as if someone had stood up using the wall, except the blood was still wet. None of us spoke for a long time. Rats, maybe, Ricky muttered, even though he didn't sound convinced. Jonas stepped back, shaking his head. Yo, that ain't right. This place is sealed, man. Nothing in, nothing out. Gerald raised his camera and started snapping photos, but his hands were trembling. It's probably just condensation and rust. Lighting can play tricks. Malik pointed to the far corner of the cell. What's that? I turned my flashlight. A tooth. Human. No root. Just lying there like someone spat it out in anger. That's when we heard it. Whispers. So faint, like the breath of someone dying in the next room. Too soft to make out words, but the rhythm was there. Not wind. Not rats. Not our imagination. Came from inside the walls. And it was getting closer. We left. Quickly. Silently. When we regrouped outside, we promised not to talk about it. Not to each other. Not to management. Nothing. Ricky even made us swear. Some dumb pact to keep things professional. But we all knew that cell had teeth. And we'd stepped too close. That night, Jonas didn't show up to dinner. The others said he was heading back to cell 41E after the shift to grab something he left. His flashlight, maybe, but he never came out. Search parties were launched. They combed the entire east wing. Every corridor, every stairwell, every possible hiding spot. But they never opened cell 41E again. The door had closed on its own, and no one could force it open. When they finally cut through the hinges 2 days later, the cell was empty. No blood, no fingerprints, no tooth. But Jonas's hard hat was sitting neatly in the center of the floor, and inside it, folded carefully, was a piece of torn, yellowed paper. It read, "I keep waking up here. Why can't I die?" That's when I started having the dreams. Every night I was back in the cell. Not just standing in it, I was in the bed, shackled, shirtless, breathing hard, blood on my fingers, and always the same voice whispering in my ear, low and raw. They forgot me. I started digging through the old blueprints, the original prison files. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe Jonas. Maybe something that explained why that room felt alive. Why my hands started shaking whenever I walked near it. But the deeper I went, the more I realized there was no record of cell 41E. It didn't exist on the map. There was no inmate assigned to it. No incident reports. No maintenance logs. Not even a key. Like the cell itself had been erased. And yet, it was there. And something inside it was waiting. On the fourth night, Malik disappeared. We were reviewing footage from the East Wing security cams. Just basic recon surveillance. And then we saw it. At 3:02 a.m., Malik was seen walking down the hallway towards cell block E. He stopped just before the cell door. Then he looked directly at the camera and smiled, like he saw someone standing behind the lens. Then he stepped into the cell. The door slammed shut behind him, and when we raced down to stop it, seconds later it was locked again. Same story. Empty. Nothing but a new message scratched into the wall behind the bed frame. I died here once, but they never found me. Welcome back to Mr.DarXnights, where nightmares aren't imagined, they're remembered. If you're still listening, you're already inside. There's a moment, just after you wake up, when your brain hasn't decided what's real and what's dream, where the smell of rust and old stone still clings to your lungs, and your heartbeat hasn't remembered where you are. That's where I lived now. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I was still in that cell. My mattress at the company lodge felt like the cot. The groaning of the pipes above me sounded just like the cries that came through the walls of Block E. Every night, the same dream. Shackled, bare chest, breathing hard, and always the whisper, "They forgot me." But last night, it changed. Last night, the whisper had a name. It said, "Lorne." My name. I jolted up gasping, heart punching against my ribs. My arms flailed, trying to shake off the feeling of cold steel cuffs that weren't really there. But I could still feel them, the pressure on my wrists. Like a phantom pain, I checked the mirror. Red marks. I hadn't been sleepwalking. I hadn't left my room. But something had touched me in that dream, and the dream had touched back. We didn't talk about Malik. Not really. After Jonas vanished, the crew thinned out fast. Half the contractors quit. Pomeridge sent down a new batch of workers, outsiders. People who didn't know the stories. But even they could feel it. There was something in the East Wing. Something watching, whispering. Cell Block E was sealed again, but it didn't matter. The sounds were everywhere now. CCTV footage kept corrupting between 2:58 a.m. and 3:06 a.m. Always that window, and always on the East Corridor. The footage would flicker, glitch, then go black. And when it returned, a new message would appear. Once it was written on the floor in water. Another time in dust on the lens itself. This time scratched directly into the steel wall. "I'm still here." Ricky stopped coming in after that. Said his wife got sick. I didn't believe him. Gerald and I were the only ones still logging reports at this point. We were the last two holding it together. But even he was slipping. He stopped shaving. Kept mumbling to himself, swearing he saw someone standing in his room at night. "They're trying to remember," he told me one morning. But it's hard when no one's left to tell the story. I didn't know what he meant then, but I would soon. Later that day, I went back to the East Wing alone. Not officially. I told the crew I was checking power lines on the West Block. But something in me needed to see that cell again. I had to feel the cold of that steel door under my palm, to hear the air hum in my ears. I had to know if it was calling me. I stepped into the hallway and felt it again. That electric buzz in the air, like being underwater. The corridor seemed longer than I remembered. Light flickering. The door to cell 41E stood half open now again. No one had opened it. I walked slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip. I reached the threshold and heard breathing, but not mine. Inside the cell, sitting on the cot, was a man, back turned, shirtless, thin, trembling. His back was covered in scars, some old, some fresh. And one of them spelled something. Lorne, exactly like my name. I didn't move, couldn't. It was like my legs forgot how to function. The air was thick with something foul, like rotted skin and wet metal. My flashlight dimmed. My hands went numb. The man turned, and I was looking at myself. Younger, emaciated, bruised. But me. He looked me in the eyes. "Why won't you let me go?" he whispered. Then the walls shifted. Not metaphorically. They moved. Concrete bled down the corners. Pipes twisted like veins. The cell was breathing. My head spun. The floor dropped beneath me. My vision went dark. And then I was there. In 1973, shackled. The riot outside the walls thundered in muffled screams. Smoke leaked through the vents. I could smell it: burning paper, pepper gas, urine. The air was chaos. But in cell 41E, it was quiet. Except for the whispers. They weren't voices anymore. They were memories. I remembered the guard dragging me down the hallway, his breath hot and cruel in my ear. I remembered the beating, the accusations. Inmate 0172, Lorne, David. Sentenced for assault. Transferred without records. I remembered the scream I gave when they broke my ribs. But there was no trial. There was no paperwork. I was dumped here off the books. A problem someone wanted to forget. And then, when the riot broke out, they sealed the wing and left me inside. No rescue, no count, no mercy. Just a steel door, locked tight, and a riot mask staring through the window. I screamed for hours, days, my voice cracking, until one day, there was nothing left to scream, and I died, right there, alone, in cell 41E. But death didn't end it. It restarted it, over and over. I woke up again, shackled, shirtless, scarred. Every time I tried to break free, the cell swallowed me again. Every time someone opened that door in the present, I saw a new face. A worker, a visitor, another soul I'd never meet, but would whisper to, desperate to tell them, "I'm still here." I blinked, and I was back, standing outside the cell, alone, flashlight dead. My heart was screaming, but I was calm, because now I knew. I wasn't a foreman. I wasn't a visitor. I was the inmate. I always had been. Somehow, part of me had refused to accept it. And when the first workers came decades later, I latched on, took their clothes, their memories, like fog rising in the morning. I built a new identity out of the echoes of theirs. That's why the names changed. Why no one remembered me. Why I remembered nothing beyond the cell. It was all a loop. And every time someone opened the cell door, I had a chance to remember. Until the door closed again. And the process reset. That's what cell 41E was. Not a prison. A memory trap. A place built from guilt and agony. Sealed so tight it fractured time itself. And I was the rot inside it, left to ferment and fester in my own denial. But this time, something was different. I had remembered. I knew my name. I knew who I was. And I wasn't alone. Back at the lodge that night, Gerald came to me. His eyes were bloodshot, lips trembling. "I saw him too," he said. "The man in the cell. The one who looked like you." I didn't speak. He leaned closer. "They say if you remember your death, it sets you free." I looked at my wrists. The red marks were gone, but something was still shackled inside me. And then I saw it on the wall behind Gerald, freshly written, dripping black ink. "One more must take your place. Welcome back to Mr.DarXnights, where remembering isn't healing. It's the beginning of the nightmare." There's no time here. Not really. The clocks inside the prison wing stopped a long time ago. Somewhere between the last breath I took as Lorne and the first step I took as someone else. But even now, even after remembering it all, the ticking still echoes inside my head. Slow, uneven, like a heartbeat that isn't sure it's still alive. I stood in front of the mirror again, and this time I didn't see the face I thought I knew. No beard, no graying temples, just the same gaunt, haunted face I saw in cell 41E. The same sunken eyes, the scar that curled just beneath my collarbone like a twisted signature of suffering. The illusion had been so complete before, so convincing, but now the face in the glass was rotting, and the reflection moved on its own. It blinked before I did, smiled when I didn't, and then it leaned forward, close enough that I should have fogged up the glass. But there was no breath, just the whisper, "One more must take your place." I didn't scream. There was no point anymore, because deep down I understood. I'd escaped the cycle by remembering my death. I'd broken through the fog, but something had to stay behind. Something had to hold the door open. If I left, another soul had to replace me. One to keep the loop alive. One to keep the prison fed. It wasn't over. Not yet. Gerald didn't show up for his morning shift. They said he never left his room. The staff assumed he was sleeping off another bad night. But when they knocked, he didn't answer. When they opened the door, he was just gone. No bag, no wallet, no note, just his boots by the bed. And scratched on the wall, next to his pillow in jagged lines. I remember now. The crew started panicking. The company sent down investigators. They put surveillance in every hallway, blocked access to cell block E. No one was allowed near the east corridor. But it didn't matter, because the door was open again, and the cell was empty, except for one thing, a name carved into the cot frame. Lorne. I walked the halls like a ghost. Maybe I always had been. The workers stopped seeing me. They passed me like fog, spoke around me, never to me, and I began to drift, room to room, night to night, feeling myself dissolve into the brick, into the rust, into the peeling paint and flickering lights. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps behind me. Other times I'd hear them ahead, running, always toward the east wing, always toward that cursed cell. And once, just once, I followed. The new guy's name was Carter. Young, fresh, naive, didn't believe in ghosts, thought the stories were exaggerated, that people had vanished for normal reasons, depression, mental breaks, burnout. He said the place had a heavy vibe, sure, but he was tougher than that. He even laughed when they warned him about cell 41E. He said, "Let me guess, the ghost only shows up at 3 a.m. with a tragic backstory and a hunger for souls, right?" I watched from the shadows as he joked, and I felt a pull, like something deep inside me wanted to stop him, to grab his arm, to scream, "Don't go in there." But I didn't, because the rules had changed. If I interfered, I'd be pulled back in. And this time, I knew what came next. Carter didn't knock, didn't pause, just walked straight to the sealed door with his little flashlight and crowbar and said, "Let's see what all the fuss is about." I followed in silence. The air around the cell shimmered thicker, heavier. The hallway lights dimmed as he stepped forward. His breath fogged in front of his face, though the rest of the building was still warm. He stopped just outside cell 41E. The door wasn't open this time, but it wasn't locked either. The metal hinges moaned as it creaked inward, and for a split second Carter froze. I could see it in his eyes. He'd heard the whisper, "Lorne," but it was too late. He stepped inside. The scream didn't come right away. First there was silence, then the sound of steel dragging on stone, a metallic ring like cuffs being dropped, then footsteps, running, fast, but not away from the cell, toward it. The others heard it too. The few workers still left. They ran in with lights, shouting Carter's name. But he was gone. Not a trace, just a smear of blood on the wall, a handprint on the floor, and scratched into the back of the door. I remember now. You're listening to Mr.DarXnights. And if you've been with me long enough, you already know. This isn't just a story. It's a warning. They always said the East Wing was cursed, that the riot in '73 left something behind. But it wasn't just blood and fire. It wasn't the missing warden or the lost records or the strange way the lights dimmed every time someone mentioned Cell 41E. It was a soul. My Lorne David, inmate 0172, a man no one remembered, a file that never existed, a prisoner without a past, screaming through the cracks of time. And now maybe someone else is screaming too, because Carter didn't vanish. He took my place, and I walked out. You want to know how I know? Because I don't hear the whispers anymore. I hear silence, and it's worse, because silence means the cell is waiting again. Not for me, but for you. They say prisons are where time goes to die, where memories fade and people vanish into systems no one bothers to fix. But what happens when the prison forgets itself? When the walls rot and the ghosts of injustice cling to the steel like mold? You get a place like Cell Block E. You get a place that breathes, and waits, and takes. And if you ever find yourself walking past a sealed cell with a door that seems just a little ajar, don't look inside. And whatever you do, don't remember, because if you do, it remembers you back. This has been another night inside the darkness with Mr.DarXnights, where even your own reflection might not be yours. Sleep tight, if you still can. Story 2: Voicemail from the Dead. Let's begin. I was brushing my teeth when the first voicemail came in. It was 3:17 a.m. My phone buzzed against the bathroom sink. Screen lit up like a soft warning. I ignored it. Figured it was a spam call, maybe some late-night drunk misdialing. The city doesn't sleep, and neither do its mistakes. But when I finally checked the phone an hour later, there it was, one unheard message. From Eli. It had his old number, the one we buried with him. I stared at it for a long time. Could have sworn my stomach dropped through the floor. My thumb hovered over the play button. I didn't hit it. Not right away. I just let the phone go dark in my hand, set it down beside the sink, and tried to convince myself that it was some kind of glitch. But deep down, I knew. Eli had been dead for 6 months. They pulled his body from the river after a supposed mugging gone wrong. No witnesses, no cameras, no real investigation. Just a closed case, a sealed coffin, and a brother who never got answers. That brother being me. When I did play the message, it was short. Just breathing. Wet, rasping. Like someone trying to speak through blood. Then a whisper, barely audible, like it had been dragged across static. They lied. Then it cut off. No signature. No second try. Just the timestamp. 3:17 a.m. I didn't sleep that night. You're listening to Mr.DarXnights, where reality bends and the shadows whisper your name. Tonight's tale isn't just a story. It's a call. And it's coming from inside your past. The next night, I kept the phone under my pillow. Silly, I know. Like I was waiting for some kind of sign. I didn't want to admit it, but I was hoping. Hoping it would happen again. Hoping it hadn't just been some electrical hiccup or sick prank. 3:17 a.m. Buzz. One new voicemail. I didn't hesitate this time. Mikey. That was his voice. I knew it like I knew my own heartbeat. Hoarse, tired, but familiar. Like he'd just come in from the cold. Don't trust them. The coroner. The cops. They're in on it. You have to dig. You have to remember. The message ended there. Click. Silence. I sat on the edge of my bed, heart pounding, hands shaking. The city outside sounded too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I started making a list in my head. Names, faces, people who'd been there after Eli's death. The detective who barely looked me in the eye. The medical examiner who rushed the autopsy. Something was off. Something had always been off. And now I had a reason to chase it. The police report said he drowned. But Eli hated water, didn't swim, wouldn't even shower with the bathroom door closed. I'd seen the photos from the scene. Bruises on his ribs, cuts under his nails. Defensive wounds, they called them. Still, they'd ruled it accidental. Said he fell. Got caught in the current. Case closed. But now my dead brother was calling me. And telling me the truth was still buried. I went to the precinct that morning. Tried to get a copy of the autopsy. The desk sergeant gave me a side glance like I was crazy. The file's sealed, he said. Family can't request it unless you file a motion with the city. But I'm his brother. Exactly, he said. which means you're too close. That phrase stuck with me. Too close. Too close to the truth. Too close to knowing something I wasn't supposed to. I walked out before I said something that would get me cuffed. Drove home, parked in the dark, sat in my car and listened to the second voicemail on repeat. You have to remember, that night I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of the living room, phone in hand, eyes fixed on the clock. 3:14, 3:15, 3:16. Buzz. The sound nearly made me drop the phone. I hit play without thinking, but this time, there was no voice, just static, and beneath it something else. A scraping sound, over and over, like nails on metal. I turned the volume up, and then I heard it. Help me out. Help me get out. It sounded like it was coming from inside a box. Echoed, panicked, like Eli was still there, still trapped. The next day, I went to see the funeral home. The guy at the front desk looked up from his crossword like I'd interrupted something important. I need to know where you buried my brother, I said. He blinked. Don't you already know? Yes, I said, but I need to see it. There was a pause. Then he pulled up a file, scribbled something on a card, and slid it across the counter. Plot 73, Section D. Why now? He asked. It's been half a year. I didn't answer, because I couldn't explain it without sounding insane. The cemetery was quiet, too quiet, the kind of stillness that makes your skin crawl. I found the plot. Fresh soil despite the time. The stone had my brother's name etched into it. Elijah Gray, 1992 to 2024. But something was wrong. The grave looked disturbed, like it had been opened. I got down on one knee, brushed away some of the loose dirt. There were fingernail scratches in the coffin's surface. Chipped paint, little splinters, like someone had tried to claw their way out. I fell backward, heart racing. The sky above twisted, blackened with clouds I hadn't seen moments before. Thunder rumbled low, close, and then my phone buzzed. 3:17 p.m. In broad daylight. Another voicemail. I didn't press play. Couldn't. That evening I set up a recorder. I needed proof. Something outside my own memory. Something I could take to someone, anyone, to say, look, I'm not losing my mind. But when I woke up the next morning and checked the file, it was empty. The voicemail had played, and the recorder had caught nothing. Just static. The next call came not with a whisper, but a demand. He's not me. I listened to that line over and over. I didn't know what it meant, until I saw the photo. It was a snapshot from Eli's funeral. One of the last taken before the coffin was lowered. A distant cousin had uploaded it to Facebook with the caption, "Rest easy, Eli. You were too good for this world." But in the background, behind the weeping family and lowered heads, there was a man, standing by a tree, dressed in black, and he looked exactly like me. I never remembered being there. In fact, I'd never even seen that tree. I called the cousin, asked him about it. "Oh yeah," he said. "You showed up late." Barely said a word, just stood off to the side. I thought it was weird, but I figured you were grieving. I wasn't, because I wasn't there. I was in the hospital that day. I had a panic attack. My neighbor drove me in. I never left the ER. I checked the hospital records. They confirmed it, but someone was at the funeral, wearing my face. The next voicemail was longer and colder. I needed a body. Yours was perfect. They did it. They gave it to me. They said if I could replace you, I'd get to live again. Don't fight me, Mikey. It's already happening. I looked in the mirror that night and saw a stranger. There was something off about my reflection. A delay, like it was remembering how to copy me. I moved my hand, twitched, then followed. My heart pounded. I looked down at my fingers, my skin, my arms, scratches. Tiny ones, like nails digging through. Not mine. His, trying to get out. You're listening to Mr.DarXnights. And if you're still with me, ask yourself what happens when the call doesn't just come from the dead, but from the version of you they left behind. The world had begun to bend around me. It wasn't just the voices. It wasn't just the strange, growing feeling that I was being replaced. No, it was everything. The phone calls, the missing time, the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. These were things I could explain. I had convinced myself that I was just caught in a nightmare I couldn't escape. But now, I was starting to wonder if I ever had control over my own life to begin with. My reflection in the mirror was the first thing that told me something was horribly wrong. It wasn't the way I looked. It was the way I felt when I looked at myself. As if I was watching someone else in the glass. Someone familiar, but not me. The eyes were the same, the hair, the skin. But there was something off. An emptiness that wasn't there before. And with every passing day, the feeling grew stronger. I could hear Eli's voice echoing in my mind, even when the phone wasn't ringing. That voice, more distant than before, calling to me, warning me. The worst part? I couldn't remember when it started. Was it when the first voicemail came through? Or had the seed been planted long before? Had I always been on this path? I had no choice but to go back to the police station. The report, the hidden memo, the voices, all of it had been pointing toward something greater, something I hadn't seen before. But now I was certain of it. They had done something to Eli, something they had done to others. They covered it up, silenced the truth. But more than that, they were coming for me. I wasn't going to wait for them to make the next move. But when I arrived at the station, something felt different. There was an eerie quiet, like the whole building was holding its breath. The lights flickered overhead, the hum of the fluorescent bulbs sounding like distant whispers. I walked down the long corridor, past desks and empty rooms, until I reached the captain's office. I was prepared to confront him, but when I pushed the door open, I was met with nothing but silence. The desk was empty. No papers, no files, just a pristine, untouched surface. But the chair where he'd always sat, was facing the wall. I felt my pulse quicken as I stepped inside. My feet felt heavier with each step, like they were sinking into the floor. The walls were closing in on me. I spun around, looking for any sign of the captain. But there was nothing. Just then, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up, showing the time, 3:17 a.m. I wasn't even surprised anymore. It was like I was expecting it, waiting for it. I tapped the screen without hesitation. Mikey, you have to stop. You're not you anymore. I'm the one who's going to replace you. I've always been here. The voice was different this time. It wasn't Eli. It wasn't the detectives. It was a deep, guttural tone. A voice so foreign, I felt my stomach churn. You're already mine. I froze. The phone slipped from my hand, crashing to the floor. I reached for it, but before I could touch it, a sharp sound echoed from behind me. I turned slowly. There, standing in the doorway, was someone I recognized. But it wasn't who I thought it would be. It was me. Couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. There, in the dim light of the office, stood a figure that was identical to me. His eyes were hollow, devoid of any emotion, and his face was a mask of something unnatural. It was me, but it wasn't. He spoke, his voice cold and detached. I was waiting for you. You've been chasing ghosts, Mikey, but you're not looking for the truth. You've been looking for me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body betrayed me. It wouldn't move. I couldn't move. The figure smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was twisted, like a mocking imitation of a grin. You're just like me now. No one will ever know the difference. No one will even notice. I backed away, but the figure didn't follow. Instead, it stayed rooted to the spot, just watching. And the longer I looked at it, the more I realized this wasn't a person at all. It was a shadow, a copy of me trapped in the same space, in the same loop. He wasn't there to stop me. He wasn't even trying to hurt me. He was waiting for me to become him. I snapped out of my trance and ran. The cold air, the feeling of being trapped, it all closed in on me, suffocating me. The world around me blurred as I sprinted through the halls, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to get out. I had to break free from whatever this was. But as I ran, my phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't need to look at it. I could hear the voice already. It was Eli's voice. Mikey, it's already too late. The words hit me like a brick. The walls of the station seemed to collapse inward. I could hear them closing in, the whispers growing louder. The hallway stretched on, but it never led to an exit. There was no way out. I turned to run again, but this time, I saw him, the other me. He stood in the shadows, his eyes glowing in the darkness. He was waiting for me. I wasn't sure if I was running to escape or running to join him. But in the end, it didn't matter. You're still here. You're listening. The truth is, you're never alone. There's always something in the corner of your vision, something lurking just beneath the surface. And sometimes the dead don't want you to mourn them. They want you to become them. Story 3: Dead Eyes on Highway 23. The moon hung low, casting long, jagged shadows over the desolate stretch of Highway 23. The headlights of the rigs cut through the darkness, briefly illuminating the crumbling asphalt before plunging the road back into night. The road was as empty as it was haunted, but the drivers who passed through never forgot the stories. They never spoke of them openly, not until they were far enough from the highway. Then, when they were at the truck stops, the whispers began. "She's out there again." The words hung heavy in the air. A trucker leaned back in his creaky plastic chair, the sound of the coffee machine in the corner filling the silence as his voice dropped lower. "Highway 23. I saw her last night." The other truckers around the table fell silent, each one giving him a long, knowing look. The diner was warm, the kind of warmth that lulled people into a false sense of safety. But the truckers knew better. The woman. Everyone had heard about her. She didn't have a name, not one anyone dared to say aloud. They just called her the woman on Highway 23, though no one was quite sure how long she'd been there. It wasn't something that started with a single incident. It was a phenomenon, a ghostly, eerie presence that haunted the road, a presence that no one could explain, the kind of legend that crawled under your skin and refused to let go. One trucker, who had been silent up until now, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His face was drawn pale. He hadn't been sleeping, and it showed. "I don't care what anyone says," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I saw her, too." The rest of the drivers listened intently, their eyes narrowing. "It's always the same. You're driving down that stretch of road late at night, maybe 2, 3 in the morning. You're alone, just like the rest of the highway. Then, out of nowhere, she appears, standing in the middle of the road, not moving, just staring." The trucker paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. The diner seemed quieter than usual, even the clinking of silverware slowing as the others listened. "Her eyes! Jesus Christ! She doesn't blink. Her eyes are wide open, frozen. You can't tell if she's alive or dead, but you sure as hell know you don't want to stop." Another trucker across the table scoffed. "That's just superstition. I've been driving this road for over 20 years, and I haven't seen anything like that." But the man who spoke before didn't back down. "You didn't see her, then?" he replied. "You didn't see her the way I did. I pulled over last week, thought maybe she needed help. Her clothes were ragged, like she'd been out there for years. And when I got out of the cab to check on her, I heard something, a noise." He paused again, his face tightening with the memory. It wasn't her. It was like the sound of wind, but it was coming from her mouth. A low, rattling breath, as though something wasn't quite right. And her eyes, they were still open, staring at me. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. "What happened then?" one of the younger drivers asked, his voice shaky, intrigued. "I didn't get too close," the older trucker said, shaking his head slowly, as if just recalling the event made his skin crawl. "I turned back to my rig, ready to get in and drive off. But when I looked back, she was gone. Just vanished." "You just left her?" the young driver asked incredulously. "You don't understand," the trucker answered, his voice strained. "That's when I heard it. My rig. It was like it had been left running, but I hadn't turned it on. The engine was purring like it was just sitting there idling, even though I knew I had shut it off before I stopped." Everyone was silent now, their eyes wide, faces pale. It wasn't just a coincidence. There was something wrong with that stretch of highway. "The next day," the trucker continued, "I went back to check on my rig. It was exactly where I had parked it, but it was empty. The lights were on, the engine was warm, but not a single trace of my belongings. The seats, the dashboard, everything, just gone." He leaned forward, his voice low and grave. That's when I knew. She's not just a ghost. She's a memory. There was a long pause. A trucker in the back of the room cleared his throat, his voice barely audible. You think she's what? A spirit? The man shook his head slowly. No, not a spirit. She's something worse. Something that shouldn't exist. She's the trauma echo. A mark left by a crash nobody remembers. A thing that can't die, can't move on. And she's trapped out there on that road, just waiting. The words hung in the air like smoke, swirling around the room. The other drivers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Trauma echo, one of the truckers muttered, like a shadow of something that happened, but no one knows why or when. The man nodded, his hands gripping his mug. Yeah, a traumatic event left such a deep scar that it became real. That's what she is. She's the crash, the loss, the thing that happened but was forgotten by everyone. She's stuck out there, never moving, never blinking. She's waiting. The silence in the diner deepened. Outside, the hum of the highway could still be heard, the distant rumble of passing trucks rolling along the asphalt. But it wasn't just the sound of trucks passing by. There was something else. Something that felt like a low, steady hum, vibrating in the air. Something that felt like it was waiting, just like the woman on the road. It was just another cold night on Highway 23. The headlights of trucks sliced through the darkness, illuminating the cracked, aged road that seemed to stretch endlessly into the void. No matter how many times the truckers drove this stretch, it never felt familiar. Every mile was a reminder that this highway held secrets, dark, twisted secrets that refused to be buried. The truckers' tales had always been dismissed as myths, stories to scare the rookies, to keep them awake during long, lonely hours. But the longer you stayed on the road, the more you started to wonder. There was something about this place, something wrong. Mitch hadn't believed the stories at first. He was a seasoned driver, someone who'd been on the road long enough to know that ghost stories were just that, stories. Yet, as the years passed, the whispers started to gnaw at him, creeping into his mind, making him second-guess every shadow, every flicker of movement he saw on the side of the road. Tonight, it was his turn to make the long haul down Highway 23. As his rig roared down the empty stretch of highway, the radio crackled with static, the familiar hum of the engine beneath him doing little to calm the growing unease in his chest. Mitch had been driving for hours, the familiar rhythm of the road beginning to numb his senses. But there was something about tonight, something that didn't sit right. It had started with the fog. Thick, dense clouds that rolled in out of nowhere, swallowing up everything in its path. The headlights cut through it, but it felt like it was closing in on him, creeping up to the windshield, covering the world in a suffocating gray blanket. Just another damn fog, Mitch muttered to himself, trying to shake off the discomfort. He'd seen worse, after all. He'd been down this road 1,000 times before. It wasn't the fog that bothered him. It was the feeling that something was waiting. Something out there, just beyond the veil of mist. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel. And then there it was, the woman. She appeared out of nowhere, standing in the middle of the road, her face pale, her hair wild, and her eyes wide open, fixed on him, unblinking, as if she was daring him to look away. Mitch's heart stopped for a second. He slammed his foot on the brakes, the tires screeching against the wet road as he swerved to the side, narrowly missing her. His breath caught in his throat as he slammed the truck into park, the engine idling with a growl. The woman stood in the middle of the road, her back to him. Her body was still, almost statuesque, but it wasn't her posture that terrified him. It was the stillness of her, the unnatural stillness, like she didn't belong to this world. Mitch's eyes darted around the truck. There was no one else on the road. The fog swallowed everything beyond his headlights. The silence was deafening. He gripped the door handle, his mind racing. Get out. Check on her. The voice inside his head was insistent, urging him to do something, anything. But the fear that gripped his chest made it hard to breathe, to move. He couldn't look away from her eyes, those wide, unblinking eyes. A soft whisper seemed to crawl out of the fog, just loud enough for Mitch to hear. His breath hitched, his fingers frozen on the door. Help me. The words didn't come from the woman's mouth. They came from the air itself, the fog that surrounded him, swirling in the night like a living thing. Mitch's gut twisted. This wasn't right. No one was supposed to be out here in the middle of the night. Not like this. Not in the fog. And certainly not in the middle of Highway 23. With a sudden burst of courage, Mitch flung open the door. The cold air hit him like a slap to the face. His boots hit the asphalt with a heavy thud, and he instinctively looked back to make sure his rig was still parked safely. The truck was just as he had left it, the engine humming softly. The woman had not moved. He took a tentative step forward. His breath puffed out in clouds as he slowly approached her. The fear in his chest was growing, but his curiosity, something deep inside him, pushed him forward. Maybe it was the years of driving, the loneliness of the road, the need to do something. Or maybe it was something darker, something he couldn't name, that made him feel like he had no choice but to confront her. "Hey!" Mitch called, his voice shaky as he approached her. "You all right?" The woman didn't respond. Her back remained to him, motionless. Mitch's heart pounded louder, each step closer feeling heavier, like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. He was almost there, just a few feet away. But before he could take another step, he heard something. A low hum, a sound, so faint that it seemed to come from the road itself like a warning. He stopped, frozen. The woman turned slowly. Her face remained pale and expressionless, but her eyes were empty, hollow sockets where her pupils should have been, staring back at him with an unblinking intensity. Mitch stumbled backward, his heart racing in his chest. The ground beneath him seemed to shift, as though the road itself was moving, warping, becoming something alive. Her voice, or the sound that passed for it, rasped in the air again. "I'm lost." The words were soft, but they cut through him like a blade. He knew, without a doubt, that this wasn't just a woman stranded on the road. This was something else, something ancient, something far older than the highway itself. The temperature dropped suddenly, and Mitch's breath fogged in the air, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Who are you?" Mitch asked, his voice cracking. The woman didn't respond, but in that moment, Mitch understood. There was no name, no story, no reason. She wasn't a person at all. With a jolt, Mitch spun on his heels and ran back to his truck, slamming the door shut behind him. The engine roared to life, his hands trembling on the wheel. He didn't look back. He didn't want to, but in the corner of his eye, he saw something just for a second. The woman. She was still standing there, in the middle of the road. And then, as if the fog had swallowed her whole, she was gone. Mitch floored the gas pedal, the truck speeding away down the road. His heart was racing, his mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. But the road had already taken something from him. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Mitch couldn't escape the image of her eyes, hollow, unblinking, staring back at him through the fog. The woman on Highway 23 had been real, but she wasn't alive. That much was certain. Yet, something in Mitch's gut told him that what he'd seen wasn't just a freak occurrence, nor some ghost story spun to spook truckers. There was more to it, a darkness that clung to the highway like a stain that never washed away. The next morning, Mitch woke in his truck at the usual rest stop. His body ached from the long drive, but it wasn't physical pain that gnawed at him. His mind kept replaying the events of the previous night, the eerie silence, the whispering voice that came from nowhere. He tried to shake it off, but it felt as though something inside him had shifted. There was a sense of dread hanging over him, a feeling that wouldn't let go. He had to find out more. Mitch wasn't the kind of man to sit idly by, ignoring the gnawing questions at the back of his mind. And the more he thought about it, the more the same question looped in his mind. Who or what was the woman on Highway 23? He knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the first to see her. There were whispers among the truckers, scattered stories they'd tell over late-night diner coffee, but they never spoke of her directly. They didn't have to. The words were always veiled in mystery, hidden behind the horror in their eyes when they mentioned the woman in the fog. Mitch decided to pay a visit to the old truck stop diner where the veterans gathered. He'd heard bits and pieces of these legends before, but this time he needed the full story. It was the only way to make sense of what had happened. The diner was just as he remembered it. A dingy little spot on the side of the road, filled with the smell of stale coffee and the hum of idle chatter. The walls were lined with photos of truckers, long gone, whose faces had been replaced by faded memories. Mitch sat down at the counter, and the waitress, a woman who had been working there for years, gave him a knowing look. "You been out there on 23, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low, almost as if she were afraid someone might overhear. Mitch nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation bearing down on him. "Yeah, I saw her." Her eyes flickered, a brief moment of fear crossing her face. She leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "You don't understand. She's not a person. She's an echo." An echo. The word hit Mitch like a cold gust of wind. His stomach tightened, and he leaned in, urging her to continue. "The crash," the waitress whispered. "It happened years ago, long before you were on this route. A car full of kids out joyriding in the middle of the night. They lost control, slammed into a truck, a big rig. The impact was brutal. That's when the woman first appeared. She's not really alive, Mitch. She's a trauma echo, a residue left behind by the crash. She doesn't blink, doesn't move. She's frozen in time. A ghost, sure, but not in the way you think. She doesn't want to haunt you. She wants you to replace her." Mitch sat back, feeling his heart drop into his stomach. A trauma echo. It made sense in a twisted way. The coldness, the unblinking eyes, the way she stood still in the middle of the road like she was waiting for something. But what did it mean that she wanted him to replace her? "What do you mean, replace?" Mitch asked, his voice barely a whisper. The waitress glanced around the diner, her voice dropping lower. "She's part of the road now, Mitch. Part of the nightmare that happened that night. The people who stop for her, they get trapped. And then they're never heard from again. You think you're helping her. You think you're just being a good Samaritan. But you're wrong. You're not supposed to save her. You're supposed to take her place." Mitch's blood ran cold. He felt like he was falling, sinking into some kind of madness. "It's the road," the waitress continued, her eyes darkening. "Highway 23 doesn't forget. Every driver that stops for her gets pulled in, becomes part of the legend. It's like the highway itself is cursed, a place where lost souls get stuck, looping in a never-ending cycle. You saw her, didn't you? Her eyes. They were empty, weren't they?" Mitch's throat went dry as he nodded. He could still see those eyes in his mind's eye, unblinking, hollow. "That's because she's waiting for someone to join her," the waitress said softly. "She doesn't want to be alone. And the highway, well, it takes its toll. One way or another, it always gets its passenger." Mitch's hands trembled as he clenched them into fists. "What happens to the ones who disappear? They become part of the echo too," she replied, her voice barely audible. "They don't die. They just become part of the road. The fog, the whispers, the eyes. They watch, but they can't leave." Mitch's mind reeled. He had to get out, had to leave. But deep down, he knew it was too late. The highway had already claimed him. He paid for his coffee and left the diner in a haze, his steps slow and heavy, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. As he got back into his truck and fired up the engine, the fog rolled in once more, thicker than ever. The temperature dropped. The road ahead seemed to stretch on forever, like it had no end. And then he saw her, the woman, standing in the middle of the road, her face pale, her eyes wide open, her gaze locked onto his, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Mitch felt a deep, unshakable connection to her. It was like they were two pieces of the same puzzle. He couldn't look away, couldn't move, as though his body was frozen in place. The fog swirled around them, and the hum of the engine felt muffled, distant. Her voice drifted through the air, soft and pleading. "I'm not alone anymore." Mitch blinked, and when he looked again, she was gone. The fog consumed the road, and he was left in a vacuum of silence. He pressed the accelerator, speeding down the highway, away from her. But the weight of what he had learned stayed with him. The road, the woman, the echoes, it wasn't over. Mitch was now part of the legend, part of the highway's twisted curse. The next trucker who came down Highway 23 would find his rig parked by the side of the road, its lights still on, its engine running. But there would be no sign of Mitch, just the echoes, and the woman with the unblinking eyes. Story 4. The Child in the Morgue. The cold air in the morgue felt heavier tonight. The usual hum of the fluorescent lights above seemed to echo in the stillness, its faint buzzing the only sound that accompanied the steady drip of the leaking faucet in the corner. Frank Thompson, the night shift morgue technician, had grown accustomed to the lonely hours of his job. It was routine. It was quiet. It was the kind of work where time seemed to stretch, dragging through the minutes and hours like sludge. His shift had just begun, and the dead bodies were already arriving. One by one, they came in, stored, cataloged, and tucked away like forgotten relics in a museum no one cared to visit. Frank had been working at this morgue for over 8 years, long enough to become numb to the harsh realities of the job. He had learned to compartmentalize, to detach from the sorrow that clung to the lifeless bodies. The dead didn't have names to him. They were just cases, nothing more. But tonight was different. Frank had just finished tagging a set of unidentified remains when the door to the cooler slid open again. It was just a single gurney, the body of a child. Frank's brow furrowed as he moved toward the drawer, the chill of the cold room seeping into his skin as he drew the body out. There was something off about this one. He couldn't place it immediately, but the stillness felt heavier than usual. As he unwrapped the sheet, the small, pale form of the child appeared. A girl, maybe 6 or 7, dressed in a simple white dress. Her skin was unnaturally pale, her hair long and matted in some parts, clinging to her cold, lifeless face. Frank carefully read the body tag, expecting to see the usual information: name, age, date of death. Instead, the tag was blank, with no identifying information, no file, no history. A chill ran up his spine. This wasn't normal. He checked the refrigerator log, but there was no record of the child being brought in. The usual paperwork had been forgotten or, more troubling, erased. Frank had been around long enough to know that things like this didn't happen by accident. But before he could process the situation any further, the cameras flickered on the screen in the corner of the room, showing the child's body lying perfectly still. Suddenly, Frank froze. He'd seen this footage before. Not of this child, but something similar. He clicked on the CCTV feed to get a better look. The timestamp on the bottom of the screen showed 11:02 p.m. The child's body was motionless, lying on the slab, but the camera angle shifted slightly. Frank's fingers hovered over the mouse, uncertainty growing as he continued to watch. Then, just as he was about to zoom in, the child moved. The girl's hand twitched, then her head slowly turned toward the camera. Frank's heart skipped a beat. He watched, frozen, as the child's eyes opened wide, unblinking, and utterly lifeless. But there was something unnatural about her gaze. It was as if she wasn't looking at him through the screen, but through the depths of his own soul. She didn't blink, didn't shift. She just stared. Frank felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. He glanced at the clock again. It was 11:03 p.m. And then, just as quickly as it had happened, the child's eyes closed. Her body shifted back into its original position. The footage skipped ahead, showing the same motionless figure. But Frank knew what he had seen. He wasn't imagining it. For a moment, Frank stood there, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. He quickly scanned the morgue for anything that might explain what had just happened. But there was nothing. No sign of tampering. No clue as to how or why this child had been brought in. No answers. Just silence. And the unsettling feeling that something wasn't right. Frank opened the file on his desk, hoping to find anything that could explain the child's mysterious arrival. But again, there was nothing. No information, no cause of death, no history. It was as though the child had never existed before tonight. The CCTV feed started to loop again, and Frank clicked on it once more. It showed the same image, the same body lying still on the table. But this time, Frank didn't look away. He kept his eyes trained on the screen, waiting for something to change, waiting for the moment that the child would move again. And he didn't have to wait long. At 11:57 p.m., just a minute before the hour, the child's body stirred again. Her hand twitched once more, then she slowly lifted her head. The same hollow, lifeless gaze stared into the camera. The eyes didn't blink. The same eerie, unnatural stare. But this time it was different. This time, Frank heard something. A soft whisper. It was faint, like a distant murmur. But it was there. A single word. Or was it a name? Frank. His blood ran cold. He heard it again, clearer this time, as the child's eyes continued to hold his gaze. Frank. His name. Frank recoiled from the screen, stumbling backward as the reality of what he was witnessing sank in. He knew, deep down, that there was no way this was just a coincidence. The child's eyes locked with his, and Frank could feel the weight of her stare even though he was thousands of miles away from the dead girl. The child moved again, her body twisting slightly as if preparing to sit up. The clock turned 12 a.m. As the new hour struck, the child slowly sat upright, her body rigid, unnatural. For 60 seconds, she sat on the slab, staring into the camera, unblinking, motionless. And when the time was up, she lay back down, her body once again still and lifeless. Frank was frozen. His breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at the CCTV feed. Something wasn't right. This child wasn't like the others. She wasn't supposed to be here. But who was she? And why did it feel like the camera was watching him just as much as he was watching it? Frank couldn't escape the feeling that something was wrong. The image of the child's unblinking stare lingered in his mind, crawling under his skin like 1,000 tiny ants. He tried to push the thought away, focus on his work, but it wasn't easy. He had spent years working in the morgue, yet he had never felt this way before. The air was thicker tonight, oppressive. The walls seemed to close in with each passing minute. It was past midnight now, and Frank had already gone through the usual checks. The new bodies that had come in, the paperwork, the inventory. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image of the child sitting up in the morgue. Her eyes, those hollow, lifeless eyes that seemed to pierce through him. He had never seen anything like it in his 8 years of working in this place. But what unnerved him the most was the whisper. Her voice, soft, distant, but unmistakable. It had called his name. Frank. He couldn't get it out of his head. How did she know his name? Why had she said it? He tried to focus, trying to shake off the creeping paranoia, but the room felt colder now. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. There was something about this child, something that didn't belong. Frank rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the fog in his head. He glanced at the clock. It was 1:15 a.m. He was almost tempted to leave, to walk out and pretend this night hadn't happened. But something held him in place. Something about that child. The urge to understand, to figure out what was going on. It gnawed at him. He turned back to the CCTV feed, hoping to find an explanation. Anything to reassure him that this was just a glitch or a trick of the mind. But as the screen flickered to life, he felt a chill wash over him. There she was again, the child, lying motionless on the table. But this time it was different. The body was positioned differently, as if it had been moved. Frank didn't remember touching her, didn't remember making any adjustments to the body. It was as though it had shifted on its own. His stomach twisted. He checked the timestamp on the footage. It was 1:16 a.m. The child's body hadn't moved since the last time Frank saw her. Yet there she was, a new position. She was sitting up again, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something in the distance. Her eyes were wide open, staring into nothingness. Then, as if on cue, the child turned her head toward the camera. Frank froze. He wasn't sure if his mind was playing tricks on him, but it felt like her gaze was directly meeting his. She stared for what felt like an eternity, her expression emotionless, but there was something unsettling about it. The way her eyes held his, like she was waiting for him to make the next move. Suddenly, the whisper returned. It was softer this time, like a breath against the back of his neck. "Frank, help me." The words were barely audible, but Frank heard them clearly. His pulse raced as he leaned closer to the screen, staring at the child. She hadn't moved her lips, but the voice was unmistakable. He quickly glanced around the morgue, his eyes darting from the cameras to the hallway behind him. Was someone messing with him? Some sick prank? But Frank knew better. There was no one here. He was alone. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and Frank could see his breath fogging in the cold air. His fingers trembled as he reached for the mouse and clicked through the other CCTV cameras, trying to make sense of the situation. But as he clicked, he found something that stopped him dead in his tracks. On another camera, farther down the hall, a figure was moving. It was hard to make out at first, but the figure was unmistakably human. The person was walking slowly, too slowly, down the hall toward the morgue. Frank's heart skipped a beat. The footsteps were light but deliberate, echoing in the stillness of the building. The figure wasn't anyone he recognized. It wasn't a staff member. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He wasn't alone. The footsteps grew louder, and Frank's eyes darted back to the CCTV feed showing the child. She was still staring at the camera, but her gaze had shifted. It wasn't focused on the camera anymore. It was like she was looking beyond it, toward the hallway, toward the approaching figure. Frank swallowed hard. He didn't want to move, didn't want to breathe too loudly, but he had to know who was out there. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The figure was almost at the morgue door. Frank's mind raced. He couldn't be the only one in the building. But why hadn't he heard anyone enter? The morgue's entrance was locked, the only key in his possession. There was no way someone could have gotten in without him noticing. The footsteps stopped. Frank was about to get up and check, when the whisper came again. Only this time it was louder, clearer. "Frank, she's coming." Frank's breath caught in his throat. The child's voice. It wasn't a hallucination. He knew that now. But who was she talking about? Who was coming? He quickly scanned the cameras again, this time checking the hallway. The figure was gone. The footsteps had ceased. There was no one there. Frank sat frozen, staring at the empty hallway camera. Had he imagined it? Had his mind started playing tricks on him, too? But just as he was about to dismiss the thought, he heard it again. A soft creak of the morgue's heavy door, followed by a low, rasping breath. Frank turned to see the door slowly opening, inch by inch, despite the fact that no one was there. He was no longer alone. Frank's heart raced in his chest, each beat a deafening thud in the eerie silence of the morgue. The door, still creeping open slowly, seemed like it was moving of its own accord. His instincts screamed at him to run, to get out, but his feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. His mind was a mess of confusion and terror, trying to grasp at the edges of reality. Was this really happening? Was the child, the voice, the figure in the hallway all part of some nightmare? Or was there something darker at play here? He had to check the CCTV feeds again. His fingers trembled as he clicked through the cameras, hoping to find some kind of explanation, anything that could tell him he wasn't losing his mind. The hallway was empty. No one was there. Not the figure, not the child. Just the lingering cold that seemed to seep deeper into the morgue. And yet, the door kept opening, the soft groan of its hinges echoing in the silence. Frank could barely tear his eyes away from the screen. That's when he heard it. The same voice, the child's voice, whispering in the darkness. But this time it was louder, more desperate. "Help me, Frank, please, I'm here." His stomach turned. It was coming from inside the morgue. He didn't know how, but he could feel it, a presence in the room with him. The child wasn't just a body on a slab anymore. She was something else, something more, something alive in a way he couldn't understand. Frank finally found the courage to look away from the CCTV feed and turned his gaze to the morgue door, now wide open. The dim light flickered from the hallway, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into the room, creeping across the cold tiles. He stood there for a long moment, frozen, his mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. None of them made any sense. Then, from the shadows, the child appeared. She stepped into the morgue, walking slowly toward Frank, her eyes locked on him with that same empty stare. Who are you?" Frank's voice cracked as he spoke, his throat dry, every word feeling like it might be his last. The child didn't answer. She simply walked forward, each step deliberate, measured. Her feet didn't make a sound on the cold floor. Her face, pale and lifeless, seemed to shimmer in the flickering light, as though she weren't entirely there, as though she were fading. Frank backed away, bumping into one of the morgue tables. He couldn't stop himself from looking down at the body lying on the table beside him. The same one from earlier, the child who had never left his mind. But as he glanced down, his breath caught in his throat. The body wasn't the same anymore. It had shifted like the air had shifted it. Her hands were now outstretched, her face twisted in a grotesque expression, a silent scream that Frank couldn't hear but could feel deep in his chest. "What is this?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The child, still walking toward him, tilted her head slightly. "You don't remember, do you?" The voice was different now. It was no longer the soft whisper of a lost child, but something darker, older. It echoed in the room like it was coming from every direction at once. Frank's blood ran cold. The child spoke again, her voice filled with a chilling clarity. "You're not supposed to be here, Frank. You don't belong." A cold sweat broke out on Frank's forehead as he stumbled back toward the door, trying to keep his footing. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now. He was trapped. The door, which had once been his only exit, was now blocked by the child. She stood between him and freedom, her eyes locked onto his with that same terrifying, empty gaze. "No," Frank muttered, but it was a weak protest. His legs felt like they might give way beneath him. He couldn't move. The child moved closer, her footfalls silent. Her presence was suffocating now, and Frank could feel the air pressing in on him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. Everything he knew about reality seemed to be slipping away. "You're dead, Frank," the child said, her voice low, almost sympathetic. "You died a long time ago, but they erased you. They erased all of us." Frank's vision blurred, and the room seemed to tilt, as if the floor was buckling beneath him. His knees buckled, and he sank to the cold tiles, his mind unable to process the weight of the words. "No," he gasped, choking on the word. "No, that's not. I'm alive. I'm here." But deep down, somewhere in the hollow pit of his stomach, Frank knew. He knew she was right. He wasn't alive. He hadn't been for years. There was no record of him, no trace. The child crouched down in front of him, her eyes inches from his face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes held an unsettling sorrow. "You were part of the accident," she whispered. "You were in that crash. They erased you from the records, Frank. They tried to bury what they did, but you're still here. You're stuck. You're part of the morgue now. Part of the forgotten." The words echoed in Frank's mind, each one a nail in the coffin of his reality. He had never seen his own death. It wasn't possible. But as he looked into the child's eyes, the realization hit him like a freight train. His past, his life before the morgue was a lie. It had been erased. His name, his identity, everything about him had been scrubbed from the records. The child placed a cold hand on his shoulder. "You're not the first. You won't be the last," she said. "But now you'll never leave." Frank tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the child's cold eyes staring back at him. Not with pity, but with a knowing emptiness. End of story 4. Story 5. The Last Dispatcher. It was past midnight when the first call came in. Ben, a rookie 911 dispatcher in the small town of Millbrook, leaned forward in his seat, rubbing his eyes. His first few weeks on the job had been uneventful. A few fender benders, some domestic disputes, nothing that could have prepared him for what was about to come. The phone on his desk rang, its shrill tone cutting through the silence of the room. He quickly grabbed the receiver, clearing his throat as he answered. 911, what's your emergency? There was a long pause on the other end of the line before the voice finally spoke. It was a soft, raspy voice, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "Help, please, the fire, it's coming back." Ben's heart skipped a beat. He didn't recognize the voice, but something about it sent a chill down his spine. He glanced at the clock. It was 12:05 a.m. The fire that had destroyed Millbrook 2 decades ago. The one that had wiped out entire families and left only charred remnants behind. "Sir, I'm going to need you to give me your location," Ben said, trying to stay calm, though his mind was racing. Where are you? The voice on the other end was faint, almost like a whisper, but it was clear. I'm still here, in the town. It's happening again, the fire. Ben's fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to track the call's location. But there was nothing. No signal, no trace. Just the sound of static and the crackling of a fire in the distance. Sir, Ben asked, his voice tight. Can you hear me? Please, we need to know where you are. The line went dead. Ben sat there for a moment, staring at the receiver in his hand. He could feel a cold sweat forming on the back of his neck. The town had burned down in 2005. There hadn't been a single structure standing since then. So why was someone calling from there now? And why would they mention the fire? He quickly checked the caller ID. There was no information on the screen, just a string of random numbers. Ben frowned. He wasn't sure if it was some kind of prank, but the urgency in the voice had felt real. Minutes passed, and Ben tried to shake off the strange feeling that had settled in his chest. He had a job to do, but as he looked down at his screen, the phone rang again. He picked it up more cautiously this time. 911, what's your emergency? The same voice came through, distorted by static. Help, it's too late. They're all gone. You have to stop it. The line went silent again, and Ben was left staring at the receiver in disbelief. The voice sounded the same, but the words, they didn't make sense. They couldn't. How could someone be calling from a town that had been destroyed so long ago? Ben's mind raced, thoughts colliding in confusion. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of glitch, some kind of twisted joke. But even as he tried to convince himself of that, he couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling in the pit of his stomach. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. He turned to his supervisor, a seasoned dispatcher named Karen, who had been working the late shift with him. Karen, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I got another call from Millbrook. It sounded like the same person. Karen looked up from her own station, raising an eyebrow. Millbrook? She asked, her tone flat. The town burned down in '05. There's no way anyone's calling from there. What did they say? Ben leaned in, lowering his voice. They said the fire's coming back. That we have to stop it. Karen's expression darkened, and she glanced around the room as if she were checking to see if anyone was listening. Look, Ben, she said quietly. There's no way those calls are real. People like to mess with the system, and Millbrook's a sensitive subject around here. People think they hear things, especially at night. But Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something was drawing him in, something that he couldn't explain. He decided to look deeper. Ben couldn't let it go. He couldn't dismiss it like Karen had. The call, the voice, the strange sense of urgency. There was something pulling at him, something that whispered in the back of his mind that this wasn't just a prank. He had to know more. The next day, Ben spent his shift in a fog. He couldn't focus on the mundane calls that came through the lines, car accidents, noise complaints, lost pets. His mind kept drifting back to that voice, to the fire, to Millbrook. When his shift ended, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Against Karen's advice, he decided to dig into the history of the fire. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he knew very little about the town's tragic past, just the bare essentials. A fire had ravaged the town in 2005, leaving almost nothing behind. The records were filled with names of the dead, but there were a lot of unanswered questions. The fire had been sudden, intense, and incredibly fast-moving. No one could explain how it spread so quickly, how it seemed to target certain parts of the town. Ben sat in his apartment, staring at his computer screen. He started digging through old news articles, looking for anything that might explain the odd calls he had received. One particular article caught his eye. It was about a mysterious fire report, written just days before the blaze, warning of a potential fire risk in the old industrial part of town. It was a peculiar find. No one had mentioned it in the official records. In fact, there had been no reports of any fire hazards in that area. The article seemed like a faint whisper from the past, buried beneath the weight of the disaster. Curiosity gnawed at him. Could this be the starting point? He clicked through the archives, reading the story over and over. The article was written by a local reporter who had claimed to have received an anonymous tip, warning about something bad that was coming. It seemed vague and cryptic, but Ben couldn't ignore the pattern. As he dug deeper, he found more unsettling details. Several people had been unaccounted for during the fire, including the town's fire chief and the local dispatcher. But it wasn't just the missing personnel that disturbed him. There were whispers about the town's officials covering something up, something they didn't want anyone to know, something related to the fire. He couldn't find a clear answer, but there was definitely more to this story than he had been told. Ben spent hours searching through every archived newspaper article, public record, and court document he could find. He was nearly at his breaking point when his phone rang again. It was the same number, the same distorted voice. "Help! It's starting again. I can see the fire," the voice whispered, its words barely audible through the static. "You have to stop it." Ben's pulse quickened. He grabbed the phone, his grip tightening as he tried to steady his breath. "Who is this?" he demanded. "Where are you? I'm tracing this call right now." There was a long silence. Then the voice spoke again, but this time it was different. It sounded almost familiar. "I'm you, Ben. I'm the you from the past. I'm the one who tried to stop it." The words sent a jolt through Ben's body. He froze, unable to process what he had just heard. "What?" he stammered. "That doesn't make sense. How is that possible?" The voice continued, but it sounded strained, like it was being pulled from a long distance. "You don't understand. I'm the dispatcher from the fire. I'm the one who failed. You're me, and you have to stop what's coming." Ben felt the room spin around him. His head was heavy, his thoughts clouded by confusion and fear. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Was someone messing with him? But the voice, it was his. It was the voice of someone who knew him, who knew things he hadn't even told himself. "I'm going to stop it," Ben said, more to himself than to the voice. He was desperate for answers, desperate to make sense of the madness that was consuming him. "I'll stop it." The line went silent, and then a whisper, barely audible, came through the receiver. "It's already too late, Ben. You can't stop it. You're in the loop now, just like I was." Before Ben could say anything more, the call dropped. His mind was racing. The dispatcher from the past? A past version of himself? It didn't make sense. But the voice had been clear, desperate, as though someone was trying to warn him. He had to find out more. He had to know who he really was. Ben had spent the last few days unraveling every scrap of information he could find. The voice from the phone, the cryptic warnings, the strange connection to a tragedy he couldn't fully understand. Everything was building to something. His instincts told him that he was being drawn into something much bigger than he could handle. And yet, the more he learned, the more he realized he couldn't stop. Whatever was happening, it had already begun, and he was at the heart of it. That night, as the full moon hung low over the town, Ben returned to the 911 dispatch center, his mind heavy with questions and dread. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The walls of the small, dimly lit room seemed to close in on him, the silence growing oppressive. His fingers hovered over the dispatch console as he sat in his seat, eyes scanning the monitors for any sign of trouble, any sign of an incoming call. But nothing happened. Then, just as the clock struck midnight, it rang. Ben's heart skipped a beat, his stomach tightening with anticipation. He snatched the receiver from the cradle, his breath shallow as he pressed it to his ear. 911, what's your emergency? He asked, his voice strained, trying to sound calm, though his hands trembled in the cold air. The voice came through immediately, familiar and strained. It was the same voice from before, the one he couldn't escape. But this time, there was something different about it, a sense of finality, an urgency that Ben couldn't ignore. "It's me, Ben. It's you. It's happening again. But this time it's worse." Ben's pulse quickened. His mind was reeling. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean? What's worse?" The voice on the other end was sharp, desperate. "The fire, Ben. It's not just the fire. It's the loop. The same disaster. It's always been this way." Ben's breath caught in his throat. "A loop? What do you mean a loop? What is happening?" There was a long pause, the sound of static crackling in the background. The voice spoke again, its tone quiet but filled with pain. "You're not who you think you are," it said. "You're not a rookie dispatcher. You were here before, back in the fire. You tried to stop it, but you couldn't. You failed. And now, it's your turn to make the same choice again." Ben felt a chill crawl up his spine. The words echoed in his mind, reverberating through his thoughts. "I'm not a rookie dispatcher," he repeated softly, his head spinning. "No," the voice confirmed. "You're me. You're the one who died that night. You were a dispatcher then, just like you are now. The fire destroyed everything, and you've been trapped in this cycle ever since." Ben's chest tightened as the weight of the words sank in. The fire, the missing people, the strange phone calls. He had thought he was just hearing things, but now it was clear. He had been part of it all along. But how? How was this possible? Was he really living in some kind of nightmare loop, destined to relive the same tragedy over and over again? The voice continued, its tone now urgent, pleading. "Ben, you have to stop it this time. You have to save the town. Save yourself. If you don't, if you let the fire burn again, you'll never escape." Ben's heart hammered in his chest. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His mind was on fire with confusion and terror. He had to stop the fire. He had to save the people. But how? What could he possibly do? "I don't know how," Ben whispered, his voice barely audible. "You know how," the voice insisted. "You always knew, but you've been hiding from it, pretending you were someone else. You've been pretending you're just a rookie, just a bystander. But you're not. You're the key, Ben. You have to face it." Ben's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles white. He wanted to run, to escape, but he couldn't. He was trapped in this moment, in this cycle. He could feel the fire, not just the one that burned the town, but the one inside him, threatening to consume everything. It was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting to break free. "Ben," the voice said one last time, softer now, "remember who you are. Stop the fire." Before he could respond, the line went dead. Ben sat in the darkness, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but there was one thing that stood out above everything else. The fire. He had to stop it. Somehow, he had to find a way to break the loop, to stop the tragedy from repeating itself. And then, as if guided by some unseen force, he stood up from his desk and walked toward the door. The weight of the past, the burden of the town's ghostly history, was heavy on his shoulders. But there was no turning back now. He had a choice to make, to confront the fire or to let it consume everything once again. With each step, Ben knew the truth. The fire had never really been put out. It was still burning, waiting for him to stop it. The town, the calls, the people, they all depended on him now. He stepped into the night, the weight of the past pressing down on him as the echoes of his past self followed him into the darkness. End of story. Thank you for listening to today's story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a good, chilling tale. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an eerie story from Mr.DarXnights. We've got plenty more spine-tingling tales coming your way. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have made the same choices as Ben? Or would you have found a way to break the cycle? Let us know. Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Stay safe and remember, you never know what might be lurking in the shadows.